So today I want to introduce Laura Shanley, who is an author, a freelance writer and a speaker, and the founder of the Freebirth or unassisted childbirth movement. So hi Laura.
Hi.
It's lovely to be here with you today. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you do and how you came into doing this?
Well, I came into it basically because when I was 18, I met a man who would eventually become my husband, David Shanley, and he was reading a book called Childbirth Without Fear by Grantley Dickreed. And he'd become fascinated with birth trauma and how when our first experience in life is traumatic, how it can set the tone for future experiences, and that most women are afraid of childbirth, and so because fear triggers the fight-flight response, which basically shuts down labor, then most women have very difficult births. They have a lot of pain, babies get stuck. And so what Grantley Dickreed said is that birth doesn't have to be traumatic. It can actually give a woman a feeling of exaltation, and it can be a wonderful experience. And then this in turn then can make life in general better when we don't enter the world in a state of trauma. So David was really intrigued by this, and he happened to be reading the book when I met him. So he gave it to me. And I was an 18-year-old college student, had kind of decided I wasn't going to have babies. I had heard about, all the stories of how horrible it was, but I really was intrigued, and I started reading the book. And really, for the first time, maternal feelings started to surface in me. I think because I had been afraid, I had sort of blocked all that. And so as I began reading that, if you basically can relax and trust your body and not have people be interfering with you, then babies can kind of fall out, and it can be a wonderful experience. And so it just made sense to me. He explained, Grantley Dickreed explained, your face turns white when you're afraid because blood and oxygen are going into your arms and legs to fight this perceived danger or run from it. And what happens when you're in labor is that blood and oxygen don't go to the uterus. The uterus is white. It doesn't have the fuel it needs. And so this really made sense to my rational, critical mind. And at the same time, I was also sort of discovering my spirituality and learning about the power of thoughts and feelings. And so when David and I eventually then got together and decided to have a baby, we just felt like, at first we thought, well, we'll have a midwife. But we felt like we are going to have to explain all this to her. Like, we don't want to be interfered with. I trust my body. I just want to be left alone. And then we started realizing that may not be that easy, to convince someone to just let us give birth in our own time, in our own way. And so David thought, well, why don't we just do it ourselves? And so we did. And it was such a good experience that we went on to have all our babies that way.
Wow. Wow, so you had all of your babies. How many babies did you have that way?
Well, I had 5. I did have a baby that I lost who had a congenital heart defect. So, but my other children, actually all the births were wonderful. And so, and now they're all grown and have babies of their own.
Oh, wow. And have your babies been inspired then to birth in the same way, to birth without?
I think they've all been inspired. No one has had an unassisted birth. None of my kids have had unassisted births, but but they have, my 2 daughters have had natural births, and one in a birth center and one in at home. And
okay.
yeah.
So that's what I was going to ask is that because it's more accessible to get care that's more hands-off, or how you describe it now, is it more accessible generally than it was when you were birthing with no midwife?
To have birth be hands-off, to have attendance.
Yeah.
Maybe, I think, the C-section rate in this country is still really high, and in most places in the world it's still really high. So I think they're still interfering with birth. I know when my grandson was born 9 years ago in a birth center, I was actually pretty surprised that they really did leave my daughter alone.
Oh,
You know, she gave birth in water, and it wasn't until the very end that a woman in jeans walked in the room, and I didn't even know who she was, and that was the midwife. But they didn't insist on checking her. You know, they didn't time contractions or measure dilation. So I was pretty surprised about that. And then my daughter, who had the home birth, the midwives really, you know, during the pregnancy were hands off, and the birth too. They just kind of let her labor in her own way. And I was there for part of the labor, but and she had told me, you know, I might want you here, but then I might ask you to leave. Okay, so I came over for a few minutes. She decided she just wanted to be with her husband and with the midwives. And so, you know, that's fine. I've never pushed my kids to, you know, I've never pushed them to have unassisted births. They certainly know, you know, or even home births. They know how I feel, and they've read my book, and I'm sure it, you know, it did have an impact on them. But unassisted birth just wasn't their choice.
That's cool. And I don't think it will be everyone's choice, but I think what's lovely about it is just that there are so many options, and that obviously we do have choices, and I think that's not always obvious when we first get pregnant, to realise that there's anything other than the sort of going to hospital route that we get shown. So it's nice to know that there are other options and other ways to be. And what I really loved and was really inspired by your work as well was the concept that birth can be really safe and comfortable as well, because we just get such an opposite image of that from day one, really. Our first experiences of birth might be on TV or in a magazine or whatever, and we're just kind of bombarded really with birth that is not comfortable or safe. So I love that, you know, that's your concept really, is that we can birth safely and comfortably. So.
Right. I mean, I think, you know, to me, when I look at the human body, it's just, I'm amazed. And to me, it's just, how can there not be some sort of intelligence behind it? And how can we, you know, people think because we get sick sometimes, or, you know, because people die or whatever, there must not be an intelligence behind or within life. And I just don't think that's true. I think there's some intelligence that designed the human body. And if we learn how to cooperate with that intelligence, we can give birth easily. It doesn't make sense to me that the very thing that ensures the continuation of the race should be the worst thing you go through. Why? You know,
the people carry on.
Yeah. And so I think it's just that people don't realize, you know, you have a field of flowers and you don't give it sunlight and water, and then the flowers don't grow, and you say, well, obviously the flowers are defective. No, you didn't give them what they needed. And I think, you know, with birth, we just have to, you know, we have to nourish ourselves. We have to, and allow our bodies to work and not interfere, not rush the process, you know, not force the flower to open before it's ready. And then, you know, it can be a wonderful experience. I mean, for me, it was life-changing. You know? So, and I wasn't that confident of a person before this. My mother would marvel. You know, she said, "You were always such a timid little girl, and how did you then give birth by yourself?" But it just, to me, it made sense. It's like there's something that knows how to grow that baby inside me, and I trust that that consciousness knows how to complete the process if we let it. And so for me, it was getting out of my own way. So facing my fears and, you know, really working with myself, my own natural resources, my dreams, using a little bit of visualization and affirmations, basically just not interfering. Just like when you go to sleep, if you have a, you know, a dark room and quiet, then you'll fall asleep. You don't have to know how you're doing it, what chemicals you're producing. It's just give yourself the right conditions, and then your body takes over and, you know, puts you to sleep, or in this case, gives birth, you know. And so, so that's what I did, you know, eliminated the inside interference from working with overcoming my fears, and then eliminating the outside interference by not having attendants there that were going to interfere with me and tell me what to do.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So you so by not having attendance, you kind of eliminated maybe some pressure, I guess, some outside pressure to respond or react in a certain way, how they might expect. You could be then free to do what you wanted to do and be how you wanted to be.
Because, you know, even in the most non-interventive midwife, you know, in Colorado, they have their list of requirements. They are required to check dilation and required to check heart tones. And if you don't, you know, if you're not, if you don't give birth within a certain amount of time after you're dilated to 10 centimeters, you know, then they have to transfer you to the hospital, or, you know, same with the placenta. If the placenta isn't out within an hour, you have to be transferred. And I've known women who say, you know, the placenta has come out 7 or 8 hours later. I got a birth notice from a woman who said, you know, baby was born outside. It was a beautiful birth. I delivered the placenta 3 days later, and we planted it under a tree.
Oh, wow.
And it was just like not a big deal to her. You know, now, you know, sometimes I suppose, you know, there are women who have retained placentas and maybe there's a problem, but I think sometimes it's just a matter of being patient. And if you can relax in the same way that you relax with the birth, then the placenta will come out. So, but if you tense up, you know, then you don't allow blood and oxygen to go to the uterus, and, you know, then you're going to have problems with the placenta also. So it's just really staying in that kind of zone and letting your body work.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I was going to go on to ask you then about how you felt like a free birth environment affected the sort of golden hour after birth. So you've kind of talked there about the placenta and how, you know, how again, just leaving birth to do its thing. Obviously, the placenta can come out days later, which is really incredible when you think about it. There's a lot of pressure again to get that placenta out and move things along. So yeah. And was that your experience as well? Was your experience the placenta came easily, or was it long?
It did. You know, the first one, my first birth, it came out about 45 minutes later. With all the other births, it came out sooner. But I just really I didn't concern myself with it. I just felt that, you know, if I was in the right state of mind, that my body knows what to do. It knew how to grow that baby from an egg and a sperm into a human being. Why wouldn't it know how to get that human being out of my body? So I have tremendous respect for that intelligence within me. And I think just as the, you know, a cat is guided, a cat doesn't read a book, you know, and I feel like that guidance is within me. It's within everyone, and we've just kind of lost touch with it. And so we just need to sort of reconnect with that inner voice that, you know, and use our rational, critical mind too. And then, you know, birth can be what it was meant to be, a wonderful experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you talk about rational, critical mind. I work with a lot of ladies who they're very they're business women, and they work maybe in London, and one of their biggest fears is being out of control, because when they're working, they're very much in their rational, critical mind a lot of the time. What were your you know, techniques, I guess, to come out of that critical, rational mind? Because obviously you said that you yourself were living in that, and you were able to kind of go in a process to come out and let go.
I guess, you know, in a way, it was my rational, critical mind that got me into this, because it was Grantley Dickreed explained it so beautifully, and that made so much sense to me. And so, you know, I never tried to like get rid of that part of me, you know, my rational, critical mind. I felt like I just need to step aside and recognize that that is only part of me, that there is this other deeper part. It's that same part that writes music or paints pictures, you know, it's that intuitive, artistic, creative mind. And I think we need both. But it's just like with, you know, having sex. If you are going to, you can't think your way through it like, okay, now I'm going to follow this diagram and I'm going to do this and this. And as long as I do these things and follow this, you know, diagram or whatever, then I'm going to have a good experience. It's like you just need to be able to sort of put that to the side for now and trust that there is another part of you, and also trust that, you know, that inner guidance is there, that I definitely felt, which I'm not really the type of person that feels that guidance that often, although I would like to, but I did feel it when I was giving birth. And with my first birth, I definitely heard a voice say, don't turn over, because I was going to give birth on my back.
Oh, wow.
You know, lie down, like I thought, you know, that's what you see women doing.
Yeah.
And then I was on my hands and knees, and I heard an inner voice, and it said, don't turn over. And just then the baby came flying out, and my husband caught him in midair, which Michelle O'Down talks about the fetus ejection reflex, that if we aren't afraid, that our bodies will, you know, sort of propel our babies out of our bodies. So, and that's how it was with John, that he literally was flying out, and David just reached out and caught him.
Wow. Amazing. That's so exciting. It sounds really amazing, and it's so cool that you're just able to tap into that, even though, like you say, it's not your normal. You don't. I think what people have an impression of sort of free birth and even home birth and water birth as kind of a little bit out there, a little bit hippie, perhaps. You have to be a certain type of person, and I think where you've said that, it just it kind of brings it into the mainstream, really. Because what you're saying is that you weren't doing those things all the time. You weren't really necessarily meditating or doing things.
Right.
A little bit
I wasn't. Yeah.
Tapped in whilst you were giving birth. So that's really. So it was your critical mind that kind of took in the information, and then your body just took over when it was time.
Right, right. And I think, you know, it makes sense to me that, you know, why would your body want to destroy you with this? It's like, okay, this is going to be so horrible. It just doesn't make sense. It just makes more sense. You know, you look at the tribal women who tend to have more trust in their bodies, and they, you know, you hear about women out in the field giving birth and just catching the baby. And I had studied tribal birth when I was writing my book. I studied it. I didn't study it when I was pregnant, but I read about these tribes where sometimes the women would give birth while they were asleep, because they had such a relaxed attitude about it that they'd wake up and there would be a baby there. And so, so, you know, I'm not saying, you know, return to tribal consciousness or whatever. I think our consciousness has evolved, and our rational critical mind has evolved, and we're meant to use it, but too much of the time it can get in the way. And so you have to learn, you know, when is the time to use that, and when is the time to kind of step aside and sort of tune into our more artistic, creative mind. And that to me is what, you know, making love, you're in that state, or in any creative, you know, dancing, singing, you're just sort of tapping into that other part of you. And when you can get in this zone, you know, athletes and artists will talk about that. You get in that zone where you just feel things flowing, and that's when songs are written or beautiful paintings, you know, are done, when you can get into that zone and access that part of you. And for me, it's just, that's when I, you know, what birth was for me.
So, yeah, so it's like so kind of being in a flow and just going with it, really, like, and I like the sports, the athlete as well, because sometimes it just relates different. If you've got someone who's not particularly creative, but they're into sports, again, that just brings it all together. Then everybody has a way of tapping into this, no matter what personality that we do. We can all tap in. So, yeah, it's really exciting. That's great, lovely. I think that is good. Do you so really what we're saying is, do you think everyone here can achieve a positive birth? Because I get some people saying to me, well, I don't know if I can achieve that. I hear it and I'm kind of do you think it's something that everyone can? And what would you say to someone who might have had a previous difficult experience, who's coming with that?
Well, I'm a big believer, as I said, in the power of thoughts and feelings. And so if someone has had a difficult experience before, I would encourage them to really explore, what do they think about birth? What do they think about themselves? Some people feel, they believe that everything is inherited. My mother had a bad birth, so I'm going to have bad birth.
Yes.
Well, that's a belief, and we don't have to have the same experience as our mothers. I mean, prior to my mother, there was my grandmother, my great grandmother, going all the way back. People were having unassisted births for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so now, my mother didn't have particularly good experiences, and my mother vomited through her pregnancies, and my sisters vomited through their pregnancies. And I vomited one day, and I asked myself, what's going on? Because I don't think we have to vomit through our pregnancies. And I realized I was afraid of motherhood. And so I told myself, I knew I wasn't afraid of the birth, but I told myself, okay, I know I'm going to be a good mother. I'm not afraid of motherhood. And I never vomited again with that pregnancy or any of my other ones. So I think people need to look at what they think are truths, that maybe some of the things they think are truths are actually just beliefs. So, okay, pregnancy is always difficult, or vomiting is a good part of pregnancy, or everybody does it. Well, Ina May Gaskin said 50% of the women in the world don't vomit through pregnancy. So I think if we can question what we think of as truths and realize, okay, this is a belief and it can be changed.
Yeah.
So, people who, if you hate yourself, if you hate your body, if you are ashamed of your sexuality, explore these things, because if you are ashamed of your sexuality, then, and you have to have sex to have, in most cases, to have a baby, then, birth can be the punishment. If you have shame about your sexuality, it can be hard to spread your legs and give birth. So I really worked with myself I focused on eliminating fear, shame, and guilt, and just telling myself I loved myself, I believed in myself. So that's what I would say to women who have had a bad experience. First of all, take responsibility for it. Even if you had a horrible doctor or a horrible midwife, there was a reason you went to that person. Maybe you just felt, and this is totally forgivable, but maybe, you were just more willing to trust another person rather than trust yourself. So you put your trust in this other person who meant well, but maybe was basing their decisions on poor science, on things that really don't make sense. And so you gave up your power and you had a bad experience. So forgive yourself, and this time decide to really kind of delve into your own consciousness and look at, what do I believe? And if you recognize a belief that, say, my mother had bad experiences, so I'm going to have that, okay, that's a belief, I can change that, and that our bodies are responsive to our thoughts.
Yeah. So it's almost like if we have a bad experience, or it could be like a red flag for something that we need to then kind of discover about ourselves, or kind of,
right, like what can I learn, from this experience? So definitely forgive yourself, forgive everybody involved. They were doing the best they could, but the doctor that decided to give you the C-section or whatever, that that's what he or she was taught. And there's all kinds of hospital rules and regulations, maybe insurance rules and regulations. And so I think, forgive yourself, forgive them, and realize that, your next experience can be totally different.
Yes.
And so, but I do think that in most cases, I think women can do this, but so much of it is getting out of their own way. And also, I think the biggest challenge really, or one of the biggest challenges, is dealing with friends and family and a society that thinks that you are insane.
Yeah.
And so you have to be willing to stop caring what other people think, and stop thinking that they have so much power that they're going to prevent you from doing this. You really just have to kind of learn to tap into your own power and feel good about that, and recognize that inner help is available, that the more we tune into our own natural resources, our own abilities, the less we will go to the authority figures to tell us what to do or to help us supposedly help us through this process.
Yeah.
So that's what I think you do have to let go of what other people think, because that's a big one.
Yeah.
People who, well, my mother doesn't want me to do this.
Yeah.
Well, my father was a doctor. My mother did medical research. My sister was a labor and delivery nurse. They definitely did not want me to do this. And so, but that was part of my path and part of my challenge, was saying, no, this is something that feels right to me. And I'm not going to have the approval of my family and society, and that's okay.
And that's like, yeah, just being okay with that. And like, certainly I can relate to that in the sense that when I was pregnant with Cameron, I didn't tell anyone what was my intention, and
right.
I kept myself to myself in terms of like preparing and what I was reading. And yeah, it was like an isolating time, but at the same time it was a time of kind of discovering myself. And I noticed where you said about not vomiting and not being sick, and I think for me that was the same. It was a bit of a red flag when I was sick, and I thought, hang on, this isn't right, this isn't what I want. And I was only sick twice ever in that.
Oh, great.
Yeah. I think by the time once it came up, I thought, okay, what do I need to deal with? And because, like you say, I wasn't sharing it, I felt like I was able to something's come up here, sorry. Yeah, I felt like I was able to use that and discover another level, I guess, of kind of trust.
Right.
So yeah, and I loved it. I mean, I was certainly very, very inspired by your work, and I don't think it was difficult then, because it was really hard. We did have internet, but you couldn't really get in touch with people very easily, and it was really hard to find people in real life who had done this. And
oh yeah,
we had the Freebirth forum, didn't we, that you started, and that's the only place where I met anyone who had any good birth experience at all. Like, we just couldn't find it. So
right.
So yeah, it was very much. I think there's a lot more support now, certainly here in England, to have a positive experience, whether it's, you know, the whereabouts it is and who it's with is a different matter. But I think there's a lot more focus now on having a positive experience and getting into your mindset a bit more about it.
That's great. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. I'm gonna wrap it up there. Is there anything else that you wanted to add at the end? Or?
Well, just if people want to learn more, they can go to my website, unassistedchildbirth.com. And I wrote a book, Unassisted Childbirth, and they can buy that on Amazon or other bookstores. And I have a lot of stories and articles on my website that, you know, some videos and things that I think people should find helpful. And there's a lot of unassisted birth groups on Facebook too.
That's good, yes. I've been having a look on those recently, so they're quite helpful as well. If you're wanting to find out more, there's some where you can find out more and some that you can go to once you've made the decision, isn't there, that you're gonna birth, you're gonna free birth. So different kind of groups, you can find out what suits you, where you're at with it. We'll put all of these links in, and I've got your book, which I have put over the other side of the room, but yeah, I'll show that up. That's been fantastic, really helpful.
Oh, good.
And it's been lovely chatting to you today, and I'm going to turn off the recording. So, and then I'll...
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.